So, by popular demand, we're going to talk about the upcoming Canadian federal election, which is set to take place on September 20th, 2021. And we're going to talk a bit about how Canadian government structure differs from American parliamentary versus presidential. We're also going to talk a little bit about the parties, the different regions of Canada, and take a peek at some of the early polls. So, just to kind of give you a general background and overview of how things work in Canada. So, Canada, unlike the United States, is a parliamentary system. That means we do not have a president. Our head of state is actually the Governor General, which is appointed by the Queen. But in practice, the Prime Minister functions as both the head of state and the head of government. There is no mechanism for electing a Prime Minister popularly beyond whether or not they win their individual district. Generally speaking, the leader of the largest party becomes Prime Minister and forms government. The only direct popular election Justin Trudeau has to win is for his own seat in Papineau. There's no nationwide direct vote, either in terms of percentage of the popular vote run, like in some countries, or something like the Electoral College, like you have in the United States. Now, something else that makes Canada rather different from the US is there is absolute party discipline here. So frequently what you'll have in the US is, because it's a two-party system, you'll have people run as like a sub-label. Like they'll run as a conservative Republican or a liberal Republican or a moderate Republican or a conservative Democrat or a progressive Democrat or something like that. That doesn't happen in Canada. Individual candidates are more or less irrelevant. All that really matters is who the current leader of the party is. Members of a party never in practice vote against the leadership of their party. And if they do, they normally get kicked out of it and have to serve as independents. And it's a very hard road to be an independent because the Canadian system is very much set up to encourage larger parties. So you get like no funding. There's all kinds of benefits you don't get. Being an independent is a very difficult road to go down. So Canada has 338 seats. If a party manages to win 170, then it controls the be it the provincial parliament, the legislative assembly, the national assembly, or federal parliament. They have different names depending on which province you're in, much like you do in the US. I'm not sure. I think there might technically be a filibuster or something that the opposition can use to delay a bill. But more or less how it works in Canada under a parliamentary system is because there's absolute party discipline, the Prime Minister or the Premier sits directly in a seat and directly controls both the legislative and executive branch. They can do anything they want. The only theoretical check on them is the other levels of government and the judiciary. Although if you're a left-wing politician, and I mean that purely in a partisan, not an ideological sense, the courts, generally speaking, won't try to stop you. So you have basically absolute power if you manage to get a majority. Now, the electoral system works basically the same on a district-to-district level as it does in the US, where it's single-member plurality. Whoever gets the most votes in any particular district or riding becomes the representative for that district or riding. So once again, that always means that the winner probably isn't going to get a majority of the votes. Now, they normally do in the US because you only have two parties, and I don't think independents really get that many. But in Canada, where you have in most areas at least 4 candidates from parties that get a significant number of votes riding, it's not unusual in Ontario, for instance, for the Conservative candidate to get, I don't know, say like 38%, the Liberal candidate 34%, and then the NDP like 20-something, and then the rest spread out from a couple minor parties. So it's very common and almost the norm. I doubt there's very many electoral districts in Canada where anyone ever gets more than 50% of the vote, which is one of the reasons why there's a pretty large electoral reform movement here. Because more so than a lot of countries, the number of votes a party receives isn't really related to the number of seats that it gets. And that's somewhat like the United States, because there's no benefit to getting more votes than what's needed to win a particular district, or I guess in the case of the states, the state in a presidential election. Like, it's irrelevant whether the Democrats win California by 1% of the vote or by 30%. They get the same number of electoral votes either way. If they win a district in California by 1 versus winning a district in California by 50. And you have a similar issue in Canada, where part of the reason why the Conservatives will sometimes get more votes than the Liberals, but not as many seats, is because Alberta will vote like 70% Conservative, and they already win all but one seat in it, so it doesn't really matter. If it goes above it, there's a certain legitimacy that comes with winning the popular vote, but in practical terms, it doesn't really matter at all in practice. So in Canada, coalition governments almost never happen. In the US, you don't really have coalition governments outside of major wars, because every time a party wins a majority. I guess the only cases you might have in recent memory is you might have some scenarios where the Democrats and the Republicans both have like 48 Senate seats or something, and then there's a couple independents. So theoretically, there is no majority government. But once again, it's just not really a thing. Canada does have a Senate. We have the House of Commons and the Senate. The Senate in Canada makes no sense. It's appointed. It doesn't have any real power. The only reason we haven't gotten rid of it is just because constitutional amendments are extremely difficult to pass in Canada, and there's not really a viable alternative, and I just don't think they'd be able to get it done. Canada's is a wide, diverse country, politically, culturally, that sort of thing. So even if some regions of the country might agree to abolish the Senate, others may not. Because the senators are appointed, various prime ministers can just stack the Senate with their supporters. And I guess it doesn't really matter that much, but it's just kind of a disaster. Now, unlike a lot of other countries, particularly the US, whenever you get a ballot, you only vote once on it. You just vote for your member of parliament or member of provincial parliament. You don't vote for any other position. My understanding is there's a whole bunch of other positions in the US, like district attorney. People keep saying dog catcher, all these other things. That just doesn't happen. All of those are professional civil service positions. There isn't really any appointed bureaucracy in Canada. I mean, on a partisan basis. Obviously, politicians will appoint people who they think ideologically align with them, or who they think will be pliable to whatever it is they want. But there's not like a direct thing as in the United States where literally every position, somebody has a party identification one way or another. It's not particularly relevant, but outside of Vancouver, municipal politicians do not have parties. Like I said, in Vancouver, it's weird because there is a conservative party that's bizarrely enough called the Nonpartisan Association and the New Democratic Party. But everywhere else, it's like that. That is a case where, because there's no parties and no party discipline, you will have people who will run as a conservative or as a liberal or as like a fiscal conservative or something like that. And you do have like a left and right wing bloc, theoretically, at least within the Toronto City Council, but nothing really permanent. So the last election left the Liberals with a minority government. Like I said, coalitions don't really happen in Canada. You'll occasionally get a confidence and supply agreement, normally with one of these smaller left-wing parties in the Liberal Party, that will allow them to stay in power. But more or less, the purpose of minority governments is just to be a caretaker government until they can have a second election and hopefully someone will win a majority government. You don't really have any, we don't really have a tradition of coalition. It's weird because it's a little bit like the US in that because we have first past the post, it is normal for one of the two main parties to win a majority, although that's changed quite a bit in recent years. So let's go through the different parties we have in Canada. So in Canada, it depends on the election cycle a lot, other than these two, which ones are relevant. But we have the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the BQ, the NDP, and the Greens. You also will have some local or minor parties. I'm not including the People's Party here because they don't hold any seats, but let's just go through them. So the Liberal Party I would describe as being left-wing socially and fairly centrist economically. Um, they've been kind of the natural governing party for most of Canada's history. I think they held power for like 3 decades or something, from the aftermath of World War I until like the late 1950s, with Diefenbaker, and they've been in power most of the time. Although, interestingly, the largest majority ever gained in Canada was by Brian Mulroney in the 1980s. So, generally speaking, they support social liberalism, so multiculturalism, political correctness, gun control, LGBT, whatever it is, rights, anti-racism, unlimited access to abortion, multiculturalism, all that kind of stuff. Fiscally, they go back and forth. During the Trudeau era, they were more populist and left wing, so they brought in like federal health care and more welfare programs and stuff like that. During the 90s, they were very fiscally conservative, and they actually managed to pay down the debt and make pretty large cuts in public spending and run a surplus. Economically, it very much depends on the particular era. Generally speaking, historically, from my understanding, the divide between liberal and conservative was more an ethnocultural one, necessarily, than I guess, ethnocultural and a religious one than an actual ideological one. The Conservatives were, generally speaking, the party of Anglo-Canada Protestants and those who emphasized a connection with the British Isles. The Liberals, generally speaking, promote were the party of Catholics, French Canadians, eventually Canadians from the East Coast as well, and emphasized either a French Canadian or bicultural or national identity. They tend to be the most in favor of federal centralization of power and building a common Canadian identity, whereas the Conservatives are somewhat more regionalist in their approach, largely owing from their party's modern roots in Western Canada. Next, we have the Conservative Party, which has had a number of different incarnations over the years, and it's changed its name a number of times. First, it was the Liberal Conservative Party, then it was the Conservative Party of Canada, then it was the Progressive Conservative Party. In the aftermath of Brian Mulroney, the Conservative Party fell from like 200 something seats to 3 and functionally only existed in Ontario and Eastern Canada. That was largely due to the fact that the Quebec wing of the party broke off to form the BQ, and the Western wing of the party broke off to form the Alliance, or I guess Reform Party, eventually Alliance. And they were reunited under Stephen Harper, who was the leader of the Western faction of the party. The Western faction was much bigger than the Eastern faction, and the Western one was generally seen as being more right-winged, whereas the Eastern one was generally seen as being more left-winged and largely indistinguishable. I would describe the Conservative Party of Canada as being slightly to the left of the Democratic Party. If you look at most major issues, such as any social issue like abortion, gun rights, any kind of cultural issue, immigration, they tend to be to the left of the average Democratic voter. They tend to be more in favor of fiscal conservatism, which in practice I find what fiscal conservatism means is cutting taxes and increasing spending and just running up a debt. And generally speaking, whenever they've been in power, they've run up the debt. They claim the Liberals are big spenders, but in practice, they don't really cut spending when they're in power. They just reduce taxes and do deficit spending, is more or less what happens. So they will claim to be center right or right wing. I think how it works is if you're someone who is right wing, you probably vote conservative. And there are members of the party who are actually fairly conservative. But because there's absolute party discipline, it's completely irrelevant, and it just doesn't matter. And this is more or less the same in most provinces. The only province where you really have a somewhat actually conservative movement is probably in Alberta and maybe Saskatchewan. But outside of that, it's just not really a thing. In British Columbia, you actually had the Liberal and Conservative Party merge. Actually, you'd had that in Saskatchewan as well, into the Liberal Party of British Columbia, which is not associated with the Federal Liberal Party. They just kept the name. So that's basically how the Conservative Party works. Then we have the BQ, who is the third largest party in Canada. Now, the BQ is a Quebec nationalist party. And it's kind of weird because it's split from the Conservative Party mostly, but it's a left-wing party that is socialist. Much like its provincial equivalent, though, the Parti Québécois, all kinds of different people vote for it in Quebec. Conservative rural voters vote BQ, like Catholics do a lot of the time, but also urbanites and like intellectuals. Basically, the BQ exists as a Quebec grievance group, and Quebecers vote for it whenever they don't get enough money from the federal government or they don't feel that they're going to get their way. So they just vote for a separatist party, and their job there is basically just to prevent the Liberals or Conservatives from getting a majority, so they have to pay off Quebec or give them something to get supply and confidence for a short period of time. They do not run candidates anywhere outside of Quebec. Although I'd always wondered if they should maybe consider running them in maybe Francophone Ontario or Francophone New Brunswick in the areas where there's a French-speaking majority, but they only run it in Quebec. Quebec independence is their theoretical goal. They can never get a majority to do that, so like I said, they're just kind of a grievance group who's there to try to get money and to act as a spoiler for one of the major parties. Now, I personally don't particularly like French Canadians, just because they're extremely anti-religious to the point where I think they've banned all government workers from wearing all religious symbols as part of an effort to own the Muslims and the Sikhs and stuff. But they just tend to be like just really paused. The only thing that they really differ from is they tend to be more anti-immigration, more kind of cultural, linguistically nationalist. Although at the same time, there is an attitude like kick Anglo-Canadians out, bring Haitians and French-speaking Africans in to have base linguistic nationalism. But that's pretty much it. Then we have the New Democratic Party, which is Canada's Socialist Party or Social Democratic Party. They've never been in power federally. The closest they've ever come was in one election, all the BQ seats switched to the NDP for some reason. They've had more success on the provincial level. In Western Canada, the Liberal Party more or less doesn't exist anymore. It's because they don't really have anything to offer Western voters. Because Western voters don't like centralism. They don't like the attempt to kind of, they view culturally steamroll the local population in favor of a cosmopolitan culture from Ontario. Also, they just feel because Western Canada has a lot of energy resources, they're going to be taken away from them and sent to the rest of the country. So, in Saskatchewan, for instance, the NDP were in power for like 30 to 40 years. In Manitoba, they were in power for a long time. They briefly took power in Alberta. Alberta is interesting because it tends to have one party in power for like 30 years or something. Normally a conservative party of some description, and they switch places with the Liberal Party in BC every couple election cycles. I'd call them far left socially. They're basically like the Liberals, but they're kind of like the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. They're kind of like Democratic Socialists of America, I think is the way to put it. They're currently led by this gentleman, Jagmeet Singh, wearing his golden bicycle thing there, and he is just insufferable. Maybe we can talk about that some other time. But yeah, and then finally we have the Green Party, which is led by this lovely lady, who is a black Jew. So I mean that's pretty progressive right there. And they are a they're weird because they claim to be a centrist party. I'd say they're far left socially and I guess to the right of the NDP on economic issues maybe. I don't know how you want to describe it, but they're just no one really cares about the Green Party. They maybe win 1 or 2 seats. We're not going to waste our time on those losers. I've come up with this fancy Excel spreadsheet to try to work our way through it. So as you can see here, this is how the distribution of votes tends to work out in Canada. The Atlantic provinces is what we refer to the combination of Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. And those provinces are all relatively small, and it's kind of hard to do separate polling for each of them. So they're just kind of combined. They're kind of a poor kind of backwater of Canada, so they tend to vote Liberal because they get gibs from the Liberals. And the Conservatives get a bit of the vote, but it's not particularly important. Quebec tends to either vote BQ or Liberal. The Conservatives get a couple seats there. The NDP won a whole bunch of seats there in kind of a fluke. But it's not really referenced again. The Ontario is something like 40% of the population. I think Ontario plus BC is half the country's population. That's where the Liberal support base is. Because Ontario tends to be, I guess, kind of the center of Canada politically and economically. And you can basically get a majority government by winning most of Ontario's seats and then a couple somewhere else. So that's kind of the Liberal support base, although the Conservatives and NDP do somewhat okay there. The Prairies used to vote NDP, but they vote Conservative because the Conservatives are seen as a Western party. Alberta just hates the federal government, so they vote for Conservatives. That's where Stephen Harper was from. BC is this bizarre 4-way race where the Green Party had their only seats there. I think they still do. I'm not sure where their other one is. Maybe it was in Eastern Canada. We'll look at that in a minute because I'm a professional. And then there's the territories who no one cares about. So this is what we have at the moment. So we're just going to skip through this and look at what the shift is. So overall, the Liberals have gotten a pretty substantial shift in most of the country. However, the fact that they've lost something in Ontario means they probably won't get a majority government. If their support in Ontario had stayed about the same, it probably would have led them to get one. But as you can see, they got like some liberal conservatives, some like left-wing guy to lead the Conservative Party. So the success of that is they've lost support pretty much everywhere outside of Quebec. I mean, that's great. The Liberals have picked up a lot. A lot of that is just due to, I think, perceived that Justin handled the COVID crisis well, that Alberta had a lot of issues with trying to reopen up too early, if you want to take that perspective. But yeah, the Green Party is basically going to disappear after this. They might lose their remaining seats. Fingers crossed. But if for no other reason than the amount of salt that will be spilt if they lose their remaining seats will be just awesome. The BQ seems to have lost quite a bit of support, which is going to go to the other parties. So that could change the electoral map quite a bit if the Liberals can pick up some more seats in Quebec. So here we go, looking at the seat distribution. like I said, the Conservatives win basically every seat but one in Alberta. And this is the seat projections. I have to rely on someone else to do this because I'm not going to go through every individual seat in the country. So the Atlantic isn't going to change in any meaningful sense. The Greens are going to lose one. The NDP is going to pick up one. Quebec is more interesting. The BQ is going to get a Feltoning. And the Liberals are going to pick up the seats. It's completely irrelevant, though, because they're going to lose them again in Ontario. I guess because of the way vote splitting works in Canada, the fact that the Conservatives lose a couple percentage points in Ontario aren't going to hurt them. Maybe those are all ridings where it's very close between the Liberals and NDP. The Conservatives are going to lose a couple seats out west just because it's perceived that they mishandled the whole COVID situation, and British Columbia looks like it's swinging Liberal, and no one cares about the territories. So overall, it's looking like the Liberals are going to end this with 162, the Conservatives 114, the New Democrats 35, and the BQ 25. So that's kind of how it is. I think the Liberals are very much in striking distance. They really just have to pick up a percentage point or two in one of the big provinces. Like if they pick up maybe like 2 in Quebec or 2 in Ontario or 2 in BC, that might be enough to flip the whole thing in their favor. Because like as you can see here, they picked up 3 in Quebec and that translates into an extra 6 seats. Maybe if something bad happens to the BQ or the BQ loses support to the NDP again, you might have a swing in that direction. I'm not really sure at this point. It doesn't really matter on the prairies because the Conservatives lose 2 seats. It's not going to make or break the bank. Maybe these will swing back Conservative at the end of the day. As always, basically the federal election comes down to Quebec, Ontario, and BC, but more specifically Quebec and Ontario. Quebec swings wildly, and if it swung even somewhat in the direction of the Liberals, they'd be able to win a majority government. If Ontario decides to forgive the Liberals for whatever it is they're angry at them for, they could get a majority government. If I had to guess at the moment, I'd say there's about a 60% chance the Liberals win a majority government, and about a 40% chance they keep their minority government. But that's just kind of my thoughts at the moment. I'll try to do fairly regular updates on it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. People ask me to do these all the time. So I did one. God bless, and we'll talk to you.